Property prices are at an all-time high right now, and many people are talking about a possible correction coming very soon. So how is it you can take advantage of a property boom, but also sidestep a potential crash? In this video, I want to share with you 3 techniques to do exactly that. If you're watching my videos for the first time, my name is Saj Hussain, and on this channel I share with you my 15+ years of property investing experience to ultimately help you get further faster in your own property investing journey. House prices right now are at an all-time high. The average house price is about $282,000. That's about 10 times the average salary. In the last 2 years alone, house prices have probably risen by about 20% in many places. However, if you're looking to get your next home right now, then this could all be relative, because if you're selling, say, for £300,000 and you're buying your next home for £350,000, you haven't really gained anything. It's kind of monopoly money, as I call it, because what you're doing, you're selling one property, all that money is going to go towards the next one. You may be even getting some more debt as well, so you don't really realize any of that capital. So how is it you can release some of that money, and how can you make money in this market right now? One method is to release equity from your existing property or properties. That might be your home, or it might be investment properties. As you're saying, property prices just in the last couple of years have risen by 20%. So if you've owned property for any period of time, it's very likely you've now got more equity in that property than you had a few years ago. So if you can tap into that, release some of that money, you could use that to purchase additional property. You're buying property that's generating you income right now, and also you're purchasing an asset that's most probably going to go up in value again over time. Even if we do have a little dip in the next few years, in the long term, it's going to go up in value. Now, if it's an investment property that you have, i.e. a buy-to-let property, then it's going to be driven partially by the value of the property and also how much rent you're getting. These are the things that are going to determine how much you can actually borrow based on the affordability of the rent from that property. Usually at least about 25% more rent you need to be getting than the mortgage payments. So these calculations you can do quite easily. If on the other hand, it's your home that you're releasing money from, then this is going to be based on your affordability, i.e. how much additional disposable income you have to be able to afford the additional borrowing. They're not going to let you borrow another 50 or 100,000 pounds so that you can invest that in another property. They're going to be based on how much is it you're earning, can you afford that additional borrowing, rather than your rent is going to be covering that necessarily. Now, just to be clear, I'm not a mortgage advisor. I can't give you financial advice. What I'm doing is sharing my knowledge and experience with you for educational purposes. When you're releasing this money from your property, remember it is debt. You are borrowing money against your assets that you own. So it's really important you're not wasting it on luxury cars, fancy clothes and expensive holidays, that you're using that money to invest in assets that are going to generate you money, and then it's the money that you generate from those assets that you use to buy the nice things in your life. The second method is to downsize. Now, this might sound a little scary by selling the home and moving somewhere smaller, but you have to think about it in context as well. So for example, I mean, where we are right now, our offices and where I live just around the corner from here, from our offices, there are some properties that are super expensive, but many of the people that live in them could not afford to buy them today. What does that even mean? Well, many of the people that are living in those houses, let's say the £1 million plus houses, they've purchased them 30, 40, even 50 years ago, where they were still, more expensive than the other properties, but they were nowhere near as expensive in terms of a multiple as they are in today's income. So what you find is some of these properties, people are asset rich and cash poor. That means they've got very little disposable income, but they've got significant amounts of wealth tied up in that property. But the only time that money is ever going to get released, if they either sell that property, they might pass away, and then the property might get sold, the money's released that way. But either way, they're not really benefiting from the cash that's tied up in that property. Particularly in some of the larger houses where the kids have now flown the nest and a couple are on their own, it might be worth thinking about, if you were to sell that property, move somewhere smaller, how much cash could they release and still have a nice and comfortable life, but have much more disposable income that then of course is used to invest in property that's going to generate the income, rather than spending the cash that they're going to release. You could also downsize your investment. So for example, there's many people I've had conversations with who say purchased a second or third investment property in London 10, 15, 20 years ago, 150, 200,000 pounds, and those properties today were 7, 8, 900,000 pounds. Selling one of those properties and purchasing, say, 2, 3, 4 investment properties somewhere else, much more cheaper in the country, means you can probably get a much higher return on that money. Yes, you've benefited from the capital growth, but what you're doing is taking that capital and putting it somewhere now where you can get more cash flow return rather than just capital growth. Now, of course, you need to think about the tax implications of that as well, because there might be significant capital gains tax that needs to be paid if it's in personal names. But a great tax advisor can absolutely help you with that to make sure it's a tax efficient way of doing it. So you're selling property that might be worth a significant amount of money right now, using that money to acquire something smaller. If it's investment property, maybe several smaller properties, or if it's your home you're selling, maybe moving to a smaller home, maybe even becoming debt free, paying the rest of that smaller mortgage off, and using the cash to invest in property that maybe you can leverage again and purchase several more properties. Of course, if you're up for it, you could also downsize by selling the property instead of downsizing the value of the property, but you could use that money to buy something much bigger. We've been talking about downsizing. However, you could use the same methodology to upsize instead. So for example, if you've got a property that's gone up significantly in value in London and you're selling that property, it might be a 1-bedroom flat, you could probably buy a castle in Dudley for that amount. Now, of course, this is not releasing you cash, but it means you're actually getting more for your money than you may be right now. Now, some of this stuff's going to sound really controversial in this video, and I'd love to know your thoughts. Pop them in the comment section below. The third and final method here is probably the most controversial. This is when you sell your house, your home, you rent somewhere and you reinvest the cash. Now, this might sound a little bit crazy, but hear me out. So for example, if you have a significant amount of equity in your home and you choose to sell your home, that's going to be a huge amount of chunk of cash that you're going to be sitting on. But of course, you've got to live somewhere. So that would mean you're now going to rent. But actually your capital now is starting to shrink because you're now starting to pay rent. That bit doesn't make sense. That's because we need to use that capital to tie up in property, investment property that's going to generate you a return, that's going to generate you an income. Because if you're just sitting on the cash, inflation is going to destroy the value of that cash as well, and you're not really serving any purpose. Now, of course, you could also wait to reinvest in a home at a future point. This is called sidestepping the market, and I'll explain more about that in a moment. So this particular strategy of selling your home, you only want to do if you've got enough equity in there that's going to generate you a healthy income each and every month. So that means the capital that you release from the sale of the home needs to be significant enough to be able to generate you significant returns on the money as well. So for example, let's say you tie that up in 2 or 3 HMO properties that are producing a really good return, and that you've got cash flow and maybe debt on those properties as well, but the money it's generating you is more than enough to pay the rent on your home where you're living. So effectively you're living rent free, but also it gives you the income to be able to live off as well. Now, sometimes it's possible just to remortgage a property, remortgage a home to do that. But for some people, it might be they've got a huge amount of equity, but they can't remortgage it. They can't borrow any money because the affordability isn't there, as we were talking about in example 1. Let me share a story with you. In the early 90s, I used to run an IT company. That's where I started in business. And in the early days, I used to also take on some work from some other people, like subcontracting work to get some computer repair work done, or some installation I would do for other people. And one of the guys I used to do some work for, a guy called Doug. I was quite early in my business career at the time. I learned a huge amount from him. He's a very experienced business guy. He's much older than me. And he'd just sold his business earlier to that, which is a floor covering business, essentially a carpets business. And he had that cash. But at the same time, what he'd also done, he'd sold his house as well. He'd sold his family home and he was living in rented accommodation. So he had all this cash in the bank, and he set up this little sideline IT business where he was subcontracting some of this work out to me. And as I said, he was much older than me, much more experienced in business, and I learned a huge amount from him. But one of the things I realized what he did at the time, he was trying to time the market, the property market. So at that time, it was like the height of the market. So he'd kind of cashed in and he had a lot of cash sitting around. But then what he was doing, he was waiting for a low point to be able to buy property. So then he purchased his home in the late 90s, and then he sat on that property for a while. Now, I haven't seen him for a long time, but I'd worked out if he sat on that property for, say, the next 10 years or so before the next credit crash, then he would have certainly made a significant amount of property. So whether he timed the market really well, or he was a super smart guy, and I think he was a super smart guy, and he'd got it right because he knew where he was in the marketplace, i.e. you sell at the highest point, you cash in, you wait to the lowest point, and you buy again. That's exceptionally difficult to do. He did it really well. I've never really been able to figure out whether it was luck or whether it was really his competence that got him that result. The thing is, really, we can't time the market. We don't really know where it's going to go. What we've got to do is based on what we do know. And one of the things that's really important is having a right strategy, using the right strategy for the right time to get the best possible results. So on one of our workshops, at Property Insider's Edge, we really focus on trying to get the strategy right for you. So using the right strategy at the right time, in the right location, based on your skill set to get the best possible results. If you want to learn more about that, just reach out to us. So what I've got next for you is another fantastic video. But before we talk about that, what I'd like to do is click on my face down here to subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free. We've got 300 plus videos on there just for you. And what I've got lined up over here for you next is a video just to help understand and find the right property investing strategy for you. So I'll see you over here on this video.